Team 4. I'm using a new tool, so I'm trying to figure this out. So if I'm a little awkward or cut off at the beginning, I apologize. So a couple of things that I want to kind of talk to you guys about that I think are really interesting points that you guys were discussing together. One is sort of this collision of psychology and philosophy. And it's one of the things that I think most students sort of struggle with in when we're talking about psychology is how come there can be more than one possible truth. I think this is particularly true for people who tend to be more linear thinkers or more left brain thinkers. This idea of, you know, there's this explanation and there's also this explanation, and both of them are right and both of them are, you know, not completely right. So that is really an interesting point that you guys are discussing. So good job on that. One of the other ideas that, and I forget who it was that brought it up, the idea of, like, I believe everybody else's philosophies except Freud. I totally get that. You know, Freud's theory on the surface feels so repugnant. That sounds like a pretty good word for it. Like, it's just, ugh. Like, really? You believe that about children? Like, what's going on? So a couple important things to keep in mind, and I kind of addressed this in the Collaborate earlier in the week, is that, you know, Freud didn't believe that children are cognitively thinking about sex. It's just like that underlying, you know, part of their own consciousness that is driving their behavior. So it's important to think that these aren't conscious cognitive thoughts, but it's still a part of understanding what their behavior is. So, you know, keep that in mind. And then the other thing too is I did talk about my daughter in the Collaborate session about sort of that Oedipal or an Electra complex, and honestly, I was, as a psychologist, I'm like, that is garbage, right? And then when my daughter was telling me she was going to marry her daddy someday when she grew up, I was like, what? So it is maybe, you know, again, in the last few years, I've sort of given Freud a newfound, I'm not going to say respect, but just a second look, I guess. So don't just discount it on the surface, I guess is what I'm saying. The other thing you guys were talking about is the cultural influence, and Tate asked such an awesome question. So we know that culture influences that. We can all agree that that happens. And Tate's question was, so does American culture influence positively or negatively the development of children? And that is such an awesome question, right? So let's unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about that. What are some things in our culture that are really valuable that we're passing on to children? And what are some of the things in our culture that may be having a negative impact? And so one of the first things that I thought of is, you know, culture is always kind of shifting, right? It's always, you know, the narrative is always a little bit different, right? So one of the first things I thought of whenever I read Tate's question was the idea of like everybody gets a trophy kind of thing, and we don't want to hurt kids' self-esteem, and, you know, that whole idea. So play with that a little bit. I want to see where you guys end up with that question of, is American culture helping or hurting children? You know, that's an awesome question. I don't know. I think we're pretty lucky to live here, honestly, but I think there's some things that we could improve on, and you guys all being future teachers, like, who has the tools to do that but you guys? So anyway, that's what I have for you guys. I'm interested to see what you guys do with that idea.